Are you ready? All right, if we can get everyone settled into their seats, we are ready to proceed with our program today. And our guest speaker. All right. Are we live? Oh my goodness, we're live to the internet, people. This is exciting. Welcome. My name is Rita Godlaskis, and I'm the editor and publisher at PhotoED magazine. We are a Toronto-based, now internationally distributed fine art photography publication, and I very much love that I'm literally seeing readers, patrons, contributors all in the same room and possibly online as well. So welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here with us. Aside from my excitement about publishing great photography stories, I'm also a massive fan of anything that celebrates women's achievements in photography and also cake. So yay! Birthday parties are basically a great excuse to get together, and that's kind of what we have here today. And I'm so pleased that you've all come to join us. In this room and online, I just wanted to mention a few quick but important thank yous and introductions ahead of our program today. Just thinking about history and the space that we're in today, I'd like to acknowledge that today's events take place on the traditional territory of First Nations people who were pushed out in the name of progress. And a few years later, in 1985, a thank you to the women that pushed the doors of this very club open, allowing women to become equal members here. And I believe that includes, my understanding is Mrs. Mirvish was part of that. So that's kind of a fun historical fact. Fast forward to today, club members, Laura Jones, we'll get her to give us a little wave. Hi, Laura, welcome. And Barbara Mitchell have been key in organizing us today. Thank you so much, Barbara. Without Barbara, we wouldn't have food. So we're extra grateful to her. Karen Teeple, I think, is here today as well. I know where she is. Oh, there she is. Welcome, Karen. Thank you so much for supporting this idea and making today possible. Our friends at the Photographic Historical Society of Canada have joined us today. If you have any questions about their program or events, Clint is also our event photographer for today. So thank you for sharing those talents with us. Celio is here as our tech expert, and he runs the program. Yay!
Don't look at me.
Apparently, don't look at him. So he runs a program for PHSC on the regular, and they have a wonderful series of events that everyone can access online via their YouTube channel. So I hope our YouTube friends are watching us as well. The Art Canada Institute has been very generous, and I'm really excited to have Sarah Angel join us today. They also have an incredible program of publishing and a newsletter that's actually really fun to read as well. So if you check that out, it's worth your time. Speaking of women running things, today our friend Kara at Sparkplug Coffee has generously donated the tea and coffee, as well as the little takeaway home treat that our in-person guests are taking with them today. Sparkplug Coffee is a local e-commerce business that delivers to homes and businesses across Canada, and they also help schools and teams and clubs with fundraising events. So check them out online, sparkplug.coffee. Following Elizabeth's presentation today, we will have some time for questions from our in-person audience. Yeah, hopefully you guys can hang out and enjoy the treats that we have on hand, tea, coffee, and cake, most importantly. A clarification on dates, I was going to note that actually yesterday was Hanna Maynard's actual birthday, but we figured, close enough. 192 years in, that's, ballpark. And according to someone on the internet, today is also Ditch Your New Year's Resolution Day, so let's have cake. With that, I want to give a warm welcome to Sarah Angel.
Thank you, Rita, and welcome everybody. I'm so honored to be here to be able to introduce Elizabeth Ann Cavalier. You guys are really in for a very special treat today, getting to hear her talk about Hanna Maynard. I had the privilege of getting to know Elizabeth Ann several years ago. My organization, the Art Canada Institute, is the go-to resource for learning about Canadian artists online. And we have an online digital library, a growing library, that teaches on the art of artists who are both well-known names, as well as artists who have been overlooked in Canadian history. And so how many years ago was it, Elizabeth? Was it 4 or 5? It's been a while. One of the best things about my job is when I have extraordinary scholars like Elizabeth Ann reach out to the Art Canada Institute with an incredible proposal. And that's what Elizabeth Ann did. She wrote us saying, I would like to write an ACI online art book on Hanna Maynard. And everybody at the Art Canada Institute was thrilled because we knew about Elizabeth Ann by reputation as somebody who was one of the brightest, most talented emerging scholars on the subject of Canadian art history and specifically photography history. And we were even more excited that you wanted to write about Hanna Maynard because we knew a little bit about Hanna Maynard, mainly that she had created fantastic composite images, but what Elizabeth Ann wanted to tell was much, much more than that, as you're going to hear today. So Elizabeth Ann embarked upon this journey. The book went live just before the holiday break, but it published officially this past Friday to coincide with Hanna Maynard's birthday. It's available online in both French and English. It's accessible free of charge, which is the same thing that we do for all of the books that we publish at the Art Canada Institute. And I'm excited to also say that in September, we will do a limited print edition of the volume. So there's lots more to celebrate about Hanna Maynard coming in the future. But Elizabeth Ann is somebody who is making a very strong impression on Canadian historians, on art historians, on photo historians, with her fantastic knowledge of photography, female photographers, and increasing the narrative that we know. And this is a real honor and privilege to be able to introduce Elizabeth Ann. I urge you all to go to the Art Canada Institute site, and you will want to be running there after you hear today's lecture, because it is a fascinating subject matter, and there is really nobody better than to talk about it than Elizabeth Ann. So welcome and thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to go into my closet and find the most Victorian thing I could find. One of the pleasures of being here with this group, a group drawn together across the audiences of Art Canada Institute, of PhotoED Magazine, of the Photographic Historical Society of Canada, is that we all know that photographs aren't just images. Their practices, their technologies, their communities, their habits of looking that can even transcend generations. And I think Hanna Maynard might have understood that better than almost anyone of her time. She made photographs that were clever, touching, technically daring, and both deeply personal and social. She turned her studio into a gathering place, her family into collaborators, and even her grief into this wonderful space for creativity. So today, on her birthday, it feels especially right to be gathered around photographs, cake, and conversation, doing exactly what she spent her life doing, creating a community of people who love to look and who love what photography can do. I also don't think it would be totally incorrect to say that Hanna Maynard loved a good party, especially ones that brought together the people and priorities important in her life. And so here we have Hanna Maynard sitting in the rattan chair right in the center in profile, which is how she was often photographed, wearing a little paper crown with, I think, a heart on it. You have her husband, Richard, beside her. You have extended family, close family. Her daughter Zila is between them. You have Arthur Rafferty off to the right, who was her longtime studio assistant, who actually moved in to the Maynard household, which was attached to her photographic studio and attached to Richard's boot and leather goods store. So you have this real community of people. This is how her photography worked, right? Dinner tables, fancy dress, children, dignitaries, excursions, picnics, bicycles, and even the spirits all belonged to the same visual world. So today, I want to take the time to focus on Maynard herself. And I think this might come at the expense a little bit of getting to know the many subjects and histories that she photographed. But I hope that it will give us the opportunity to get to know Maynard better as a photographer, as a businesswoman, and as a person. And what we'll see is that the camera becomes part of her everyday sociability, and that vice versa, her formal studio portraiture practice was deeply influenced by a very human sensibility and understanding of community. In fact, I think it became the engine for both her creativity and her business. So let's get to know her a little bit. She was born in 1834 in England, in Bude, Cornwall. She met Richard Maynard, who was the son of a cordwainer, who was a shoemaker. Richard himself was also a shoemaker. They fell in love, they got married, and for whatever reason, sense of adventure, sense of opportunity, they decided to emigrate to Canada. They settled in Bowmanville, which is just down the 401, in 1853. And this is where they started their family. So here I have Richard surrounded by their first four children. Now, while they were in Bowmanville, Richard, I guess, had to scratch an itch and took off to the West Coast to do some prospecting. This left Hanna at home by herself with the children, and as if raising 4 children isn't enough, she decided to take up photography. It's in Bowmanville that we think she learned photography, took up the practice as an amateur. When Richard returned from the gold fields where he was prospecting, he did very well for himself. Hanna had fully immersed herself in photography. He did so well, the opportunities seemed plentiful, that they then decided to move the entire family out to Victoria in 1862. And before I switch slides, make a note of these little faces because they are going to reappear frequently throughout her photographs. So they arrive in Victoria in 1862, and within a year, Hanna Maynard had set up a photographic studio. Victoria then was a newly incorporated gold rush boomtown. Hanna herself described Victoria as a city of tents, gullies, and swamps where the inhabitants were mostly miners. Doesn't seem like a nice place to raise a family in that moment, but I think Hanna saw, and Richard too, saw a lot of potential there. You can imagine that in this place of transients, people coming and going, sailors, prospectors, miners, migrants, that there would have seemed like endless subjects to photograph. What a wonderful business opportunity when you're not in just this community of 100 people, but there's new people arriving and moving through all the time. Photography too was really conducive to this environment because people wanted to use photography, one, as a way to mark the occasion, make a lot of money in the gold fields, take a photograph of yourself. You want to reassure your mother back home that you're doing okay, take a photograph of yourself. Lots and lots of good reasons to have your photograph taken. So Maynard sensed these endless possibilities, and she sensed this really practical application for her photographic skills, this revolving door of people. By the end of 1862, she opened the Mrs. R. Maynard's Photographic Gallery. Like I said, it was attached to the family home. It was also very proximate to Richard's boot and leather shop. And the studio would move 2 more times to its final spot on Pandora Avenue in 1892. And it was a purpose-built studio, the final one. It had big sort of windows to enable natural light for her photographic practice. It accommodated all of the family. And that block still exists today. It's known as the Maynard Block in Victoria. Her business ran for 50 years, 1862 to 1912. And for Maynard, a Victorian woman, this offered a great deal of independence and financial stability. This was important. Richard's away at the gold fields. Anything could happen to them. So having this income was really important for Maynard and her family in this space. The use of Mrs. R. Maynard as the name for her studio, and that it was connected to the family home, is something that I think really delicately balanced Victorian understandings of a woman's role that were often confined to the domestic, all while pursuing this really outward-facing role in her community, establishing professional networks, not just her own, but that extended beyond her husband's professional networks. And more interestingly, it meant that photography was not something done apart from life, but that was really a part of it. I have many examples that I'm not going to talk about today that are all deeply fascinating and that you should all go read about in the ACI book, because what I want to focus on today is Hanna. So here we have Hanna in the parlor of her studio, and the parlor of her studio was also the parlor of her family home. In this image, she's wreathed by the photographs that she's taken and that were taken by others. She is situated within this kind of beautiful halo of little tiny faces. The studio, by the same token, was also an extension of her own domestic space. So the plants, the furnishings, the textile, the arts, the curios that would normally be understood to decorate the home of a well-to-do Victorian woman seep into her photographic studio. And if you have a very keen eye, what you'll notice is that many of the things in this image you'll actually see throughout some of the images that I'll be showing you today. Now, unsurprisingly, it was with children that she had her greatest success as clients in the beginning. And maybe that's the reason she chose these two adorable little cherubs holding this camera as her studio stamp. And I want to make a note here, Mrs. R. Maynard. So she's using her husband's name, right? She's respecting the kind of proprietary or properness of being a Victorian woman, even though she's going alone in this business. Photographic artiste, photographic artist. Now, in the 19th century, photography was not necessarily considered an art. Here, I think she uses the word artist very cleverly. It gives a kind of professional authority. It shows a kind of conceptual invention and creativity, but it also marks her technical skill. And this is really good because in early photography, children were a technical problem. For so many, I mean, they're still technical. Children were a technical problem. Here we have two images that deal with one of the issues, which is long exposure. So by 1870s, when Hanna's studio is really taking off, exposure times, I'm calling them long, they were really 1 to 3 seconds. If you were in poor lighting, it could be about 10, 30 seconds. With my smartphone, taking pictures of my 7-year-old sometimes is impossible. So the Victorian technology of a 1 to 3 second exposure, that is a long time for a child to stay still. Maynard solved this. She solved this by using natural poses, theatrical settings, and by using play as a photographic strategy, right? These are not casual snapshots. They're really thoughtful. They're staged worlds that allow these children to, one, relax a little bit, to engage in the moment, to engage in play, and in that play to actually stay still. So we have this little girl with a dog, for example, and it's this moment of tension between the girl and the dog where they're staring at each other. She has a toy that it wants, and so the dog is frozen, waiting for the little girl, and the little girl is frozen, waiting for the dog to respond. It's in these moments of play that we have the kind of stillness that Hanna Maynard tapped into to make these successful photographs, to solve that technical problem. Photography in the 19th century would have also been wildly intimidating for a young child, right? You're told to hold still. You're in this room with really unusual equipment. And so Maynard used props as a way to help kids relax, to help make the experience more pleasant. Now, her son, Albert, ended up being a taxidermist for one of the local museums. So my guess is that this was an early Albert experiment. It is a one-eyed stuffed Wolverine, and I'm not sure if it's actually making this kid more nervous or less nervous. I'll let you judge. I have a close-up of the one-eyed Wolverine. But you know, I think if Hanna were here today, I suspect she would be absolutely delighted that we are still talking about her one-eyed Wolverine, because it's exactly the kind of detail that she loved and that made her photographs so successful. It's a little bit absurd, it's a little bit tender, and it is completely unforgettable. She also solved the technical problem of children with innovation, specifically photographic technique. Now here we have a picture of a young girl at a beach. Fine. The thing is, she's not actually at a beach. She's in Hanna Maynard's studio. So Maynard would have set the girl up on something comfortable to sit on. She put a mirror at the base of the little girl so that the reflection of the mirror would create a water-like reflection. So she's creating this kind of, she's using ingenuity to create this naturalistic scene. And I don't know if you can see my little cursor, and you probably can't tell from this image, but the girl is not actually sitting in front of this large rock face. Here she's using a technique of composite or montage, where you take two photographs or photographic negatives and you cut, assemble, and rearrange them to form a new image. Taking a photograph outside would have been really difficult. This photograph specifically would have been really difficult to make outside. And so Maynard used the comfort of the studio space to put this child at ease, but use this photographic technique to create a really compelling naturalistic image. Maynard also used this creativity and skill, not just in the photographs that she made, but in the marketing of the studio itself. Here I have 3 examples from what is maybe her most widely recognized series, The Gems of British Columbia. It's a project that she started in 1881. It lasted until 1896. And the gems were these yearly collages of every child that she had photographed that year. That's a lot of children if you're looking at just one. That's a great deal of business that she's generating here. So what she would do is she would get all of the images, she would collage them together. She would sometimes use photographs, but also other things. She would use pictures of other things. She would use clippings. She would use drawing. She would use little elements of plants, fibers, things that she would find around her studio, and bring them together. She would then mail these out to everyone who had had their child's portrait made at the Mrs. R. Maynard studio that year. So this is a wonderful way to remind people, hey, I do a good job. And not only do I do a good job with your one child, I do a good job with all of these children. And look at how creative and technically proficient I am, that I'm able to assemble them into this greeting card for you at the end of the year. And of course, these were wildly popular. You can imagine receiving this, people would circulate them, people would show their friends, and it would boost the overall business. There's this great entrepreneurial sensibility to it. And here I want to give you a sense of how they're made. So on the left, you have the finished carte de visite size gem. And this is what she would send to all the families. And on the right, you have a sense of how she actually made it. So she would collage all of these things together. And then on either side, you'll notice these clips. She would hold the final collage up in this apparatus and re-photograph it into a single negative. And then from this single seamless negative, she would make the prints for the carte de visite. So it was, there's a real labor that goes into this, but there's also a real knowledge of how these processes work and how she can exploit them to do these types of pursuits. What I find totally fascinating is that every year she would include the previous gems into the new year. So she had to find clever ways to do this. And I think this example, I know it's really small, but here you have this painter's palette right in the center, and from 1884. And you can see how it was included at the bottom right of the 1885 gem. You also have off to the left the 1883 gem, and these 2 things that look like little flags that are being held up by this small girl in the center are actually previous gems. So they're gems within gems, but then get included in another gem. So by the final gem, you have thousands and thousands of these tiny little faces looking out at you. It is just such an extraordinary thing. And again, you can see the apparatus that she would use to make that final negative from which the carte de visite were made. This one is, I don't know why I have a soft spot for this one, the gem begonia. But I think this is it's a really great example of how, when I said photography was not something done apart from life, but a part of it, This is where her studio and her private spaces really merge, right? They are inextractable from one another. You have the Dieffenbachia plant here that's held up by this little cherub planter, which you'll see in many Maynard photographs. And she used that as inspiration to create the gem begonia for 1892. Now, Maynard was keen to expand her technical skills and was always interested in new forms of experimentation. She published and corresponded frequently with many trade magazines of the moment. The most frequent one was the St. Louis and Canadian Photographer, which has a weird name, but she corresponded often with them. She sent in images, frequently gems, and they were wildly praised. Of course they would be by this publication, often in the form of poem, which is another reason you should go check out the ACI book because some of the poems are in there. She also tested her hand at ideas she would have encountered at one of the many books being published in this moment on photographic tricks. Victorians, we know they love trickery. And so photographers were producing these manuals of how to do certain photographic tricks, headless portraits and statue photo sculptures. So here is Maynard's play with the idea of a photo sculpture. The way that you would do it, you would cover your subject in flour, likely a rice flour. Their skin, their hair, and clothing in this white powder. You would photograph them against a black background, and anything you didn't want visible, you would drape in black fabric. And then when you get the negative, whatever was black would be clear on that glass plate negative. So then the photographer could actually scrape away parts that they didn't want. So if, this Hanna happened to have an arm dangling, she could actually scrape that away on the negative to create a completely empty space. And then that negative could be printed on top of a pedestal, or sometimes the subject was standing behind the pedestal. I really love these two examples side by side because you can see how she took one pedestal and flipped it upside down to use in these two different situations. And this little baby is also found, I won't tell you which one, it's also found in one of her gems. So that's your homework, to go find the baby in the eggshell. Now, this effect is like wildly innovative and totally fantastic in its own right. But in Maynard's hands, it could also be used to tell a story. And so here we have a photo sculpture that tells this wonderful story of loss. We have her daughter, Lily, who's kind of happy holding this bird cage. And in the next photo sculpture, the bird cage dangles at her side, the door is open, and Lily is searching for her lost bird. So, not only is there this interest in technical skill, a proficiency with that technical skill, but then the ability to wield that skill into storytelling, right? Into something that was thoughtful, meaningful. These playful manipulations of photography are not side notes in Hanna Maynard's practice. They are evidence of a technical confidence, multiple exposure, montage, mirrors, but they're also really good business. When you walked into Maynard's studio, what you would have are these studio portrait display boards. As someone going to get your photograph taken, this would have been supremely helpful. Oh, I want this prop and this pose, or I want my photograph to look like this. But then you come across these photo sculptures and you go, well, I definitely don't want that. But that's really neat. This photographer must be really good that she's able to do these types of photographs. So there's this advertising of her skill, this self-promotion that comes along with it. And I really like this series of photo sculptures because her whole family is in it. So you have Maynard up at the top, you have Richard down here on the right, you have Rafferty, her studio assistant that she wrangled in to do one of these. And of course you have her daughter Lily at the very bottom. Because for Maynard, along with other people's children, her own children and her family were a constant source of inspiration for her. Lily, her youngest daughter, was a frequent muse. And here I have 3 photographs of Lily, early photographs from the 1870s. And you can see Maynard deploying some of those tricks, strategies, tools that we've talked about, right? So here we have a very nice portrait of Lily. Here we have Lily at a wash basin, but what you'll notice is there's a mirror here. This might seem pretty innocuous, but I think it's Maynard investigating the capability of the mirror to show the different planes of her subject, right? Front and back simultaneously in a single photograph. In the one on the right, we have that use of montage, of composite. We have the 2 subjects placed in. We have props brought in, the bird cage. We have the background that is now being used as a foreground. And we have this use of lace within the photograph as a curtain. So she's playing with scale and size and different types of textures to make these photographs. Her grandchildren too, because she had an enormous family. Her grandchildren also appear frequently in her photographs. Here is Maynard sitting at a beach with a young girl. The beach, the rock in the background is Seawash Rock in Stanley Park. And what I think is really interesting is that this background comes up really frequently in Maynard's photographs. And it's a really great way to see how Maynard was capable of telling different stories using the same subjects. So here with Maynard and the small girl, we have this lovely beach day setting. They're quietly reading. Everything is very calm and nice. I think what's open on her lap too is actually the painter's palette gem that I showed you. So, you know, promoting her skill. But then we have this photograph, same background, of her husband, Richard, and explorer Newton H. Chittenden off to do something very rugged and go out and explore. There's, again, taxidermy at their feet because that is constantly in Maynard's photographs. But it's a really great way to see how she could sensitively use these different props according to the needs of the sitters. And for us, looking back at Maynard's body of work, these types of backgrounds are really useful because they help us to identify what photographs can actually be attributed to the Maynard studio. Props and backgrounds. And even her floor, she had multiple floors that you could customize, different furs, different rugs that could be brought into a scene. There was, of course, lots of dress up. And I love this photograph. I don't have a lot to say about it, but I included it because I love it so much. The idea of just dressing up as these quaint little farmers on this beautiful background. But fancy dress was a part of getting your photograph made. Here I have her granddaughter, Laura Lillian. Laura Lillian would actually go on to be a bit of an amateur photographer herself. She has a few albums of her own photographs that are at the Royal British Columbia Museum that you can see. And like her youngest daughter, Lily, Laura Lillian also was a kind of constant muse for Hanna Maynard. And I really love this photograph on the right because when we look at it on the screen, it looks like a fancy dress portrait, like many 19th century fancy dress portraits that we've seen. But what Maynard did with this is she actually, she would separate the layers of paper and create volume underneath the surface of the photograph. So her puffy sleeves and her hair and everything she's wearing is actually 3-dimensional if you see the final print, which is, again, this wonderful continual sense of technical investigation that Maynard had. Now, you'll notice the title, Laura Lillian Maynard, named after Hannah's daughter in remembrance 1900. Within a handful of years, Maynard suffered a series of devastating personal losses. The first was her daughter, Laura Lillian, who I showed you those 3 portraits of, who passed away from typhus in 1883 at the age of 16. It's followed by the death of her daughter-in-law, Adelaide, in 1892, and then the death of her daughter, Emma, in 1893. And it's at this time that lily flowers become a frequent motif in Maynard's work. Here she has this bursting arrangement of flowers in a vase affixed with a small self-portrait on the vase itself. And this, can be read as maybe a reference to the relationship between generations of women, mother, daughter, granddaughter. It might also be a reference to lilies as a common funerary or commemorative motif. But during this time, after the death of Lily, Adelaide, and Emma, we see Maynard producing more and more self-portraits. These were, unlike what I've shown you up to now, were more made for personal interest. They were typically not for sale. They were typically not put on display boards. And so I think they offered Maynard opportunities to explore her own photographic proficiencies and creativities. So here we have a great example of both proficiencies and creativities together in a multiple exposure photograph. Now, a multiple exposure is several exposures on one negative. This could be done many ways. Usually it was done by a rotating lens cap or a folding, flipping lens cap. And it allowed for certain parts of the wet plate negative to be exposed at a time without having to expose the whole thing. So you don't get those, some of you might know the Mumler photographs, the spirit photographs where there's like a hazy person in the background. That was not Maynard's style. Multiple exposures in and of themselves are not particularly impressive. They were very, very common in the 19th century. But with Maynard, they become impressive when you notice the unbroken garland of flowers between the hands of the figures. This is a multiple exposure that took timing, skill, precision, lots and lots of planning and foresight. Right, each time she moved to a new position, she would have to be really careful not to disturb this garland, because the garland is the one thing that is being kind of drawn through each exposure of that negative. These types of multiple exposures have been labeled as tableau vivant, and I think this is something that comes after Hanna Maynard. This is something that the Royal British Columbia Museum archives have labeled these as. And they're not totally wrong. A tableau vivant is a stage scene posed like a living picture. It's often theatrical, allegorical, humorous. But unlike conventional tableau vivant that were based on scenes from literature, mythology, Maynard's highly calculated technical photographs flowed from the whimsy of her imagination and the practicalities of her lived experience as a Victorian woman. So here, through careful posing, deft arrangement of objects, and the technique of multiple exposure, she presents 4 versions of herself in a scene of domestic activity. And this activity is dynamic. You can almost hear the knitting needles clacking. You can hear the tea pouring, right? And what is totally fantastic is that the figures aren't isolated. They are actually supporting one another. You have these 2 Hannahs on each end holding the same string. One's work can't be completed without the other one. Same with the 2 in the center. One is holding the cup and saucer, one is pouring the kettle. You can't have one without the other. They are fully integrated and dynamic with each other. That is just a total marvel. And of course, her most loved photograph, and I think what is probably the inspiration for today. Here, not only are we getting multiple exposure, but we are getting composite at the same time. She's bringing different techniques together. How fantastic is that? So the 2 Hannahs seated at the table would have been done through multiple exposure. She'd sit in one chair, the lens would be uncovered, recovered. She'd sit in the other chair, the lens would be uncovered, recovered. But this Hanna up here, who is cheekily or clumsily maybe spilling tea on top of Hannah's head over here, would have been montaged in. That's a separate photograph that she would have carefully cut out seamlessly combined into this one, and then re-photographed into this negative, this seamless negative, to appear kind of untouched, right? That is just so fantastic. It's so fantastic. For all of her precision in photographic technique and her savvy as a businesswoman, she really didn't take herself too seriously, right? Photography was expressive, and Maynard saw in it not just a commodity or a trade, but a conduit for her joy and her true self. We also see the inclusion of others in her multiple exposure works, namely her grandson Maynard MacDonald and her 3 daughters. Here, in this multiple exposure portrait, we see photographs Maynard has taken of her 3 daughters while they were alive, included into the scene, and not just placed in the scene, but included in the kind of dynamism of the scene, in the relationship of figures. We have her grandson, Maynard MacDonald, who came to live with Hanna at the death of his mother, whose portrait sits. And we have 2 Hannahs and her grandson shown both as himself and as a living bust. So she's including photo sculpture in this multiple exposure. So we have this presentation of a really playful, dynamic conversation between the living and the dead, the animate and the inanimate, as well as us who are pulled into the photograph as Maynard looks out at us, right? She's bringing us into the conversation. Here we have a multiple exposure of a practical joke in action. This must be one of my favorites, I think. So we have this time not Hanna driving the narrative, but Maynard MacDonald driving the narrative. On the left, we have this little boy who is in total suspense as he looks at the boy on the far right, who's dangling an insect on a string over Hannah's shoulder, unsuspecting Hannah's shoulder. And so, there's this moment of tension before Hanna looks up and sees this bug and screams, and everything goes to total chaos. And in that moment, we have Maynard MacDonald in the center who engages us. He lets us in on this practical joke. He has his finger up as if almost to entice us into the joke, or maybe blame us for the practical joke. We'll see this idea of engaging the viewer by looking out or looking into the photograph come up in many of the works she made with her grandson. Always up for new pursuits, she took up cycling with her grandson, and they often went on outings in Victoria's newly established Beacon Hill Park. And in addition to this really lovely intergenerational companionship, we have, of course, Maynard's pursuit of photographic innovation. Here, the main question being, how do we photograph objects in motion? How do we photograph cyclists? Well, it turns out you can't. So how do we get around that? How do we make them look like they're cycling? Well, she devised these tiny little blocks that would hold the bikes in place. So while it appears that they're actually in motion, they're perfectly still for this shot, except, funnily enough, Hanna, whose face must have moved during the exposure, because she's the only one who actually is in motion. Her face is blurred. And because it's outside, she's contending with natural light. So we have an overexposed sky off to the right, where Maynard filled in by hand. She tried to draw the tree, which doesn't quite match the really robust foliage off to the left. She also tried her hand at the stereoscopic image. Here we have a photograph about the making of photographs. Now, a stereoscope is a photograph taken from 2 slightly different angles, 2 slightly different images that when viewed together through a stereoscope would produce a 3D image. Many of us know those Viewmasters from the 80s. I have a stereoscope with me, so afterwards we can all look through one together. And here we have a photograph about the making of a photograph. So we have Maynard perched on her bicycle, as if in motion, right? Her feet are up. It's like she's going. But we also have her assistant here at a large format camera that's on a tripod making her photograph. But what you'll also notice, because a stereoscope needs two different images, you have a second tripod here. So this hint at the other tripod on the left that when a viewer looks through a stereoscopic viewer and sees this scene, they become placed between the two tripods and they become almost the director of the scene, right? They are in the place of witnessing the photograph being made, the technicalities of the photograph being made. So you can read it as a really clever scene about the story of a photograph. Now, after all of the tricks, the composites, the practical jokes, Hanna Maynard keeps returning to this, her family, together in front of the camera. And here again, we have a stereograph, this time of her children and grandchildren. And of course, her 3 daughters are included in the scene as well. Now, stereograph is a technology that was really meant to make photographic scenes feel present. When you view a stereograph through the viewer, you feel like you are standing in that place. And so I think it's really interesting that this format was chosen for this family portrait because it's designed to make people feel like they are together, to reunite people within a specific space, and to also bring us into it too, to make us, looking at her photographs, feel as though we are enveloped in her world and in her family. Now, we started at a dinner table and we're going to end at one. Photography never left Hanna Maynard's social life. The studio, the home, and shop were all in one building, guests, family, business, all mixed together. This photograph is just 7 years before Richard's death in 1907 and 12 before her retirement in 1912 on the 50th anniversary of her studio. And it really couldn't be more clear. For Maynard, photography was not something that she stepped away to do, but it was how she lived. And just looking at this, you have the photograph of her daughter up to the left, you have Maynard cycling off to the right, you have the people that she loved together in one room. Now, one of the things that I am most grateful for in writing the Art Canada Institute book on Hanna Maynard was the chance to really live inside this world for a while, to literally step into the parlor by moving back and forth between her photographs, her studio records, her family albums, her own words, and to see how completely photography was woven into every part of her life. Not just her profession, but her friendships, her motherhood, her grief, her humor, and her sense of possibility. Because what art is not just a remarkable body of work, but a portrait of a woman who made photography a way of being in the world, a way of staying connected, of remembering, of expansion, building community. So, on this very fitting occasion, gathered as we are around photographs, conversation, and cake, I'd like to raise a teacup to Hanna Maynard, to her curiosity, her ingenuity, her warmth, her wonderful, unruly imagination, and to the communities built around photography that she helped to create and that we are still a part of today. To Hanna.
I'll try to speak loudly. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was wonderful. I really appreciate all your research. And of course, we now will go home and get to that go home line.
Yes.
But in the meantime, folks might have some questions for us. Is there anyone? There we go. Can you please speak up so that our friends on YouTube can also hear us?
Hi, I'm wondering where you found the archive or where the archive is held.
Yeah, great question. So the majority of her work is at the Royal British Columbia Museum. Things are scattered about a little bit, but most of the negatives are there, negatives and prints are there.
Who have they keep them and then they did them in the
Yeah.
gallery, or was there someone managing the archive? I manage an archive, so.
Yeah.
Um, so how did they get to the museum, I guess I'm asking?
That's a really great question. So once she retired, her business was taken over by Albert for a little bit, and then merged with another photographic studio. A granddaughter ended up taking, it went passed through several hands and several names. And then I think when things folded all together, Albert's relationship with the museum through his taxidermy efforts built that bridge where the collection went there. But I can't detail for you every single step, but in a roundabout way, after many hands, that's how it got there. Yeah, you're welcome. Hi.
Wonderful talk, thank you so much. I'm wondering, you mentioned that in her composite images with the natural elements and with the standing part in the background, were those her photographs that she was using, or were those someone else's images?
So those would have been drawings. The backgrounds in her studio would have been large painted backdrops. When she did use outdoor scenes in her photographs for composites, those were actually likely made by her husband, Richard. So Hanna taught Richard photography because she thought, and this is my guess, she thought that it would make him more socially mobile to be able to have this photographic practice where he wasn't just a shoemaker, but now he could go on commission for the Canadian government to take photographs of newly incorporated lands within Canadian holdings. And so Richard made many, many landscape photographs out in the field that then would be processed through the Maynard studio. So she had this wonderful inventory of rocks and seasides to draw from, to include in composites. Sure.
Did you, thank you, Ron.
Good.
And you obviously lived her, and you know her really well. That your work has resulted in. Did you see any evidence of, or read about any evidence of her interest in theosophy? Because she was working during the period when there was a lot of keys and things like that.
Not theosophy, but she was a member of the Spiritualist Society. And spiritualism is this belief that one can actually communicate with the deceased. And there was this large network in Victoria in this moment that she was a part of. Even the mayor of Victoria was a spiritualist, and they have records. And so she was a part of that community. I don't know that theosophy ever kind of looped in. But in terms of her own kind of personal philosophical kind of approach to life and death, it would have been guided by the spiritualist group. And in fact, I think the epitaph on her tombstone is a spiritualist saying. So it was something that she fully embraced.
Well, the investments of photographs of their daughter, are they possibly related to that, or we don't know?
I think many scholars have made that connection. I don't want to lean too hard on it, because I think it's easy for everything to kind of all succumb to this idea that she was like dealing with grief in everything that she did, and that spiritualism was driving the making of these photographs. I think it was much more kind of holistic and dynamic than that. But yeah, there's certainly, I think there must have been a small percentage of her that felt like by including the photographs of her daughters that they were being not brought back to life, but included in her life in a meaningful way. Welcome. Yes.
What was it that brought you in? Why?
Oh,
Spark.
what was the spark? I mean, how could you not have many sparks when you look at these images? So My doctoral research was on 19th century landscape photography, specifically topographical and survey photographs that were made in the mapping and planning of the CPR route. And so I was really fascinated in the ways that these early landscape photographs gave Canadians a sense of place and understanding of this new and expanding country that they were inhabiting. And many of these photographs and photographers made their way to Vancouver and to Victoria. And so as I'm tracking these 4 men moving across the country, we land in Victoria and I see Hanna Maynard. What a fantastic human being, this woman on kind of the outskirts of Canada, in this barely incorporated town, making a business and taking photographs, and then also participating back in that kind of colonial record keeping that I was seeing with these landscape photographs. So that was kind of the bridge and the drawing. And then once you dig into the Hanna Maynard archive, I mean, it's easy to go down many different paper trails and get totally captivated. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Is there any evidence of how she became involved in photography in the first place, or who inspired her to become involved?
Yes. So she learned photography. I think she learned photography while she was in Bowmanville. There were I don't think there was a practicing studio photographer in Bowmanville at that moment, but there was a woman in a nearby town who had a photographic practice, and there was also a photographic supply store nearby where she could read materials and pick up any supplies that she would need. But I think she probably came at it, as most people did, most women did in the 19th century, as an amateur practice, right? This, finding some time amongst 4 children for herself, and then seeing the opportunity to monetize that, to grow that as a business when she moved to Victoria. Yes.
Just getting back to the photographic archive, explain whether or not her archive consisted of more than her glass plate negatives. Does she have carte de visites and cabinet cards?
Yeah.
Correspondence?
There's all kinds of things in there. So there's many glass plate negatives. There's many prints, carte de visites, cabinet cards, images of gems. There's albums, the Maynard family albums, which contain a lot of Hanna Maynard's photographs, Richard's photographs, and photographs by others, which is fantastic to see how she is visually assembling her world amongst other worlds. There are, unlike the Notman studio as the kind of gold standard of photographic record keeping that then gets turned into a whole museum, Maynard was not. I don't know if she was not a record keeper or just the records have not survived. So all we have there are record books, but the numbers and dates are really hard to form correspondences to the images themselves, unlike Notman, where everything was, you can tie every image down to the second it was made. So there are many bits of ephemera. I haven't done the lengthy work of assembling it all together. That's someone else's PhD somewhere. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the question slightly related to that. So I was wondering about the logistics of her studio. If you know what days it was open, times, who could kind of access it. And also like if there were things like a wait list. And it was, if there were other studios in Victoria or where.
Yeah, I love that. I do not know her operating hours, but I do know, just having gone through both the record book and also the images themselves, that her studio was a really welcoming place. And so in the 19th century, we see many photographs of Chinese settlers, Black settlers to Victoria being photographed in the Maynard studio. And this, I think, is something not unique, but really special that occurs there, right? That she understood that in order to make it, she would have to open her studio to everyone, and embraced bringing all sorts of walks into her studio. There was other photographic competition in Victoria. There were other photographic studios. There were many itinerant photographers who passed through Victoria at the same time. Some of them actually used Maynard studio to print their works. So photographers like Frederick Daly and Carlo Gentile, who were on commission often with her husband Richard, would come to her studio to have their photographs printed. And I think in the end, she ended up buying all of their glass plates before they left town. So there's much photographic activity happening amongst photographers, both permanent and itinerant, and also amongst the community, right? That she was out in the community. Here I have this fantastic large format camera. It's not an actual camera, it's a float for like a civic parade. And so like Maynard is out in the community making herself known, but she's also inviting all members of that community into her studio. Yeah.
How expensive was it for someone in the community to get their photo taken?
That's a great question, and I have no answer for you. It would it would have been more economical than having a painting done, because it was a kind of a fast and reproducible medium, right? And so that all walks did come through her studio, I think means that it was an event to have your photograph taken, and people really dress themselves up for these events, but that all members of and all classes of society came through her studio meant that it was accessible as a range. Yeah. Yes.
Might Emily Carr's work being influenced in some sort of a way? With a disconnect there, maybe, but I don't know if that.
I don't know if because there is lifetime crossover between the two women. I don't know if they would have ever encircled one another. That is a fantastic question, and the archive has left me no answers for that, or no clues towards a possible meeting between the women.
But in terms of creativity and the advancement that this lady had, and Emily Carr, it's similar type of going into other parts of the universe.
Yeah, and I wonder if, both of them managed to do what they did in part because they were produced or products of similar contexts, right? That Maynard subscribed to all of these Victorian ideals of what a woman should be and how they should conduct themselves respectably in society, but at the same time, she's in basically a frontier town, right? Where there is opportunity for her to build something that she wouldn't have been able to build in Montreal or Toronto. And I wonder if that context maybe applies. I'm not an Emily Carr scholar by any means, but might have applied to the kind of context that fostered Carr's ability to do what she did, to travel and to see the things that she saw. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll hit the cake.
Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Did you earlier say that the gems, the end of your comments, was sent out as a carte de visite?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's
It's tiny, yeah.
So the bases you see in that, you've seen them, I gather.
Here, we'll get the size. So I think I have the size written.
I'm just curious, possibly see anything.
I know.
I know. So is that family?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a carte de visite and not a cabinet card, because a cabinet card would have been slightly larger. Yeah.
So when she kept adding them.
Oh, they're microscopic.
They are.
Yeah. Yeah. Tiny, tiny microscopic babies everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you all for your wonderful care and attention. Thank you, Nita. Thank you for organizing this.
Yes, this has been wonderful. Please enjoy birthday cake, tea, coffee, there's a bar, you know, we can really party. Tip the bartender. And have a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you've got your stereo view, the music on. Yes. Part time. Exactly, exactly. There we go. Can I turn the projector off? That's my question. Oh, yes, we need a photo. Thanks, Lynn. Perfect. Wasn't she good?
Yeah.